Let's see, people are showing up now, rolling in. Okay.
Morning, everybody, or afternoon, evening, whatever time of day it is, I guess.
Yeah. Where are you, Ricardo? Are you in Oakland?
No, I just got back. I'm down in Pátzcuaro in Michoacán.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. I guess you guys have noticed half the attendees anymore are AI note takers, so just have to get used to that, I guess. I
Yeah.
will say, after the sessions are over, I just noticed this yesterday, AI takes notes much better than I do. So, I mean, fine, you do it. Okay.
There's something to say about its efficacy.
Something, it uses better English, I think. It's more literate than I am, possibly. So that's kind of discouraging. Anyway, okay. So a few more. Here's Matthew. Great. Okay. All right. And welcome. Is it Liwa?
Oh, aloha. Yes, it's Lehua. And I'm out of Grand
Lehua.
Junction, Colorado, but I'm from Hawaii originally.
I see. Well, welcome. Glad to have you. Hey, Dave. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Charlene. Okay. Matthew, how you doing?
Well, Elias, how about you?
Good, good. Good to see you. All
Likewise.
right. This is going to be a rich conversation. So maybe given all the stuff that we want to talk about, we should go ahead and launch right in. I think the first thing I'll do is just introduce our three speakers just briefly, and then I'm going to hand off to the first one, who is Ricardo. He's the Director of Economic Democracy and a staff attorney at the Sustainable Economies Law Center in Oakland, California. So in that role, he co-creates policy structures and institutions, collaborating with individuals and organizations working on economic democracy, land liberation, and cultivating just food systems. He also coordinates educational programs, legal services, and policy advocacy around grassroots economic development, mostly through democratic organizations and worker co-ops. Jay Cumberland's here. Hey, Jay, welcome. He is also a staff attorney at the SELC, and he is the founder of Co-Living Council. His focus includes worker and housing co-op conversions. His past work has included tenant rights and strategies around state-controlled and governed corporations in California. And finally, Davide Damiano is based in Milan, and he is the president of Pandora Sociale, which is one of our topics today, social co-ops. And he is also an advisor to the Fede Solidarità organization. He works as a director of fundraising for the Eris Foundation, has a master's degree in economics, and studied at the London School of Economics and Political Science. So welcome to all three of you. So we're going to kind of pass the ball around a little bit, and starting out with Ricardo talking a little bit about the SELC and the great work that they do. And then he will hand off to Jay. Ricardo, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you all today. Let me get to my... Okay, can you see how the Law Center unintentionally, potentially stumbled into creating different types of social co-ops? Okay, because that's what Jay and I are going to talk about this morning.
Great. Okay.
Yeah. So thanks, Elias, for inviting us. Yeah. So we're going to talk about what we've tried to create, why we tried to create it, how, kind of the process, and some of the lessons that we learned. And so here's a little bit of the flow that Elias just also shared. But I'm gonna talk a little bit about what this whole Law Center thing is really about. So what do we do at the Law Center and why? I'm just gonna I know that y'all have been in this community of practice for a while, but just as a refresher, my attorney brain wants the definition fresh, because when we're talking about the different models, to be able to compare and contrast. So there's that. What was it? I'm not a prec, you're a prec. Wait, what's a prec? Jay is going to talk about the permanent real estate cooperative that we developed at the Law Center, and the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative as a case study to that. I'm going to talk about California prison cooperatives, and some of the challenges and opportunities that we found there in developing policy and working with folks inside of San Quentin Prison to start some potentially, hopefully, worker co-ops and, depending on your definition, social cooperatives in California prisons. Ciao. Then we're gonna pass it to David, and we're gonna hear some reflections from him. So that's the flow. Feel free to drop in questions and hopefully we have some time to just chit chat, talk, no big whoop. Okay. So recently there's just this sense that I've been having, and I've been thinking about what must it be like for a fish when they realize that they're swimming in water? The moment that they recognize that oh, this thing that I'm living in is actually not the only thing that could be. And I think over the last few years, we've been seeing this, whether it was with COVID-19, Black Lives Matter movement, the war in Palestine right now, this current administration. There's all of these reminders of the systems and the structures that we are in, that we didn't have a choice building, and that we actually don't want to recreate and perpetuate. And so this got me thinking about the fish and what a moment it is to have that recognition, that realization. And so what are some of the gracias, amor. What are some of the waters that we're swimming in? And so some of the waters that we're swimming in at the Law Center and trying to navigate through is these pillars of the extractive economy, and that certain values dictate the institutions that we create. And we know that the values that underpin our current culture and our current economic system are ones that we don't want to continue to perpetuate. And so just as a law center, to bring the law into this and how the legal infrastructure and rulings and things have perpetuated these pillars of extractive economies, is this divine right of capital, the shareholder primacy norm. It's a Supreme Court case that has been reaffirmed and reaffirmed and reaffirmed. That says a business corporation is organized and carried on primarily for the profit of the stockholders. The powers of the directors are to be employed for that end. So the way the system is working is exactly the way it should be working, based on the values and the principles that are incorporated into our laws. So we are living the dreams of wealth hoarders and profiteers. They've shaped the rules. This morning, I was just listening to the news about how they're gonna, with this big, beautiful bill that they're trying to pass, strip away all state regulations for artificial intelligence. So that's, a nice little dystopic nightmare we can dream into a little bit. But as we try to think at the Law Center about the future that we want to live into, how do we transform these institutions that we want to build? How do we seed institutions we want to help create a more cooperative future? And we have to understand the water that we're swimming in. So, and particularly the nonprofit industrial complex, or the NPIC. And it's really well articulated in this book, The Revolution Will Not Be Funded, by the Women Insight Center for, I forget their name, but it's a really good book, and you can listen to it for free if you have Libby or Hoopla, one of your connected to your local public libraries. But basically, the NPIC is a set of symbiotic relationships linking the political and financial technologies of the state and the control of the owning class with the policing of public political ideology including especially emerging left and progressive social movements. So these institutions, nonprofits, are facilitated and supported by foundations that are basically wealth hoarding shell corporations. And you can read all about it in that book, and there's plenty of things that are analysis that has been done on the EBPREC. But as I think a lot of folks working in nonprofits, it's like, how are we perpetuating this existing system versus challenging it? And so how are we creating pillars of a regenerative economy? And so for us, legal professionals, like at the Law Center, we are trying to expand our attention from the law as it relates to just particular businesses to we as people exist in many forms, in many spheres, and that our concerns as attorneys should exceed those of just legal concerns. And so how are we advising and supporting our clients and the work that we're doing to support a different type of economy? And one of the ways that I like to move through my work is informed by Movement Generation's just transition principles. It's resonated with me a lot. It's resonated with a lot of other workers at the Law Center. And the three principles that they've articulated is, if it's the right thing to do, we have every right to do it. And so when we started talking with folks inside of San Quentin, trying to build these prison cooperatives, we understood that it was the right thing to do. So we had every right to do it. And so we're moving forward trying to do that. The second principle is, if we're not prepared to govern, we're not prepared to win. And I think a lot of the social co-ops and other types of cooperative forms are about building our capacity to govern ourselves and govern our communities, because we're not taught that in our schools and our daily lives. And then the last principle I'll bring up right now is, if it's not soulful, it's not strategic. And so how are we bringing cultural practices, rituals, the wisdom of our ancestors into the work that we're doing? And this photo is from the first day of a 4-day pilgrimage I went on with the Purepechin tribe here in Michoacan, who are, I'm Purepechin, my abuelo was Purepechin, and this is a pilgrimage that happens every year to carry the fire of the Purepechin people from one town that stewarded it from the last year to the town that will steward and make sure the fire doesn't go out the next year. So how are we bringing that wisdom into the work that we're doing? And I know that it's been mentioned on previous calls with y'all, but just to reemphasize the situationship in the United States, that when we're thinking about putting these principles into practice, it's important to remember that every state has different laws dictating what is and is not legally a cooperative. And there might be some useful guidance at the federal level with the tax code about what is and not a cooperative. And we think about looking at other models around the world of social cooperatives and getting tax breaks, that probably will have to be a federal intervention and policy intervention that we would do. But as we create the state structures, that each state might look a little different and have a little bit different laws. So that's a little bit of how we move through this work, that the Sustainable Economies Law Center, and that we exist to bridge the gap in legal expertise needed to transition from destructive economic systems to innovative and cooperative alternatives. And here's some of my coworkers. Also, just because I'm an attorney, Jay's an attorney, law is complicated stuff. This is not legal advice, but don't worry if you want legal advice or legal information. We have a Resilient Communities Legal Cafe that we put on 3 times per month. It's almost always virtual now. You can come from all over the country if you want to talk to us. So go to our website at theselc.org and come to a legal cafe to talk about co-ops and the law.
Awesome.
So right before I pass it to Jay, I'm just going to remind us, or actually just also myself, about like when we're talking about social co-ops and building social co-ops, how are we defining them? Should the things that Jay and I talk about actually be considered social co-ops or not? And so the definition I'm going to really briefly lay out here are ones that I took from CCOPA's World Standards of Social Cooperatives, the main characteristics. And then also Rocky Mountain employee ownership's definitions in the practice and promise of social cooperatives. So the first is that they operate by the definition, values, and operational principles of the cooperative model, that they're multi-stakeholder, so they have more than one membership class, that their primary purpose is a social purpose. So in my mind, I think about that as like in the United States context, a charitable purpose, but maybe it is even beyond what we would consider, what the law would consider a charitable purpose. It's operated in other contexts, mostly with local government funding, and then sometimes through contracts with local private companies for workforce development. That social cooperatives are bottom-up, collaborative, community-oriented agents of change, especially in the social care delivery, that creates social innovation that governments and markets have a difficult time creating. They're community-controlled versus being captured by the nonprofit industrial complex or by the state. So that was a thing that was emphasized in both of those papers that I took this from. And then the last is that there's a non or limited distribution of surplus, that surplus actually is meant to go back into that social purpose that the co-op is meant to do as its primary goal. Okay, so that's my intro and a little bit of the definition to help remind us. And now I'm going to pass it over to Jay to talk a bit about the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative and the permanent real estate cooperative model that we helped create. So, Jay.
Thanks, Ricardo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've ended up here with you all because Ricardo was giving me a brief overview of this presentation that he was going to do, and that prior screen, the definition of social co-op, and I said, didn't we kind of already do this? And that's what I'm going to give an overview of, is how a model that we've created, which is this East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, or EBPREC for short, has a lot of the characteristics of a social co-op. So I just wanted to give a grounded example of something that's existing. I think we created it in 2017, so it's been running for about 8 years now. Has a lot of these characteristics. Some of the challenges, some of the limitations that exist in doing this kind of model in the absence of, what exists in other countries, which is like a lot of local government funding to support the social co-ops and stuff like that. Yeah, so let's dig in. If you'll advance the slide. So I think social co-ops, as I've seen it, they're rooted in sort of the care economy, I think, as you traditionally construe it. And I guess real estate is probably not traditionally what you think of as a care economy thing, but it is where a lot of care happens, is in the home, and protecting the home and keeping it affordable is ensuring that care can happen in a safe space, in a space that's intergenerational, that doesn't interrupt and sort of influence kids' lives and parents' lives. So it's protecting a space for care. And it has a social mission in a way to create intentional communities, to keep real estate affordable, and to help people do this, to empower them to make the real estate in their communities affordable and intentional. I think while you can make that case that this is sort of a care-based organization, I don't want to direct your focus mostly to that. I want to direct your focus mostly to what is this form that we've created, and how could it be used in the context, even if of the more traditional care things, of child care, of elder care, of care for the mentally disabled and things like that. If you'll advance the slide. So one of the features that we focused on in creating the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative was its governance, its relationship to its stakeholders, its relationship to the people that it served, the residents, and its relationship to the community that it was operating within. The Permanent Real Estate Cooperative is essentially a blend of a community land trust and a housing cooperative. They typically are separate organizations, and we've blended them together in this model with some distinctions from the existing models. A community land trust is multi-stakeholder in a way. It has a board of directors that is composed of 3 different classes of people. It's a third residents, 1/3 experts in real estate, or finance, and 1/3 community members of the area that it serves. So the service recipients are represented, the residents are represented, the people providing the services, the experts or the staff members may have representation on the board, and then the community also has representation. But there's no actual community membership that is voting for the community people that are going to be on the board or voting on the experts that are going to serve on the board. The residents and the experts kind of together choose who's going to be the community representatives. And this is the organization that is typically forming housing cooperatives. Those housing co-ops are then sort of purely resident focused. The residents are the ones that are on the board of directors. They're the ones controlling their own housing situation with some support from the community land trust. But there's a difference in the board of these organizations and how they're governed at different levels. And what we wanted to do was make something that was like a housing co-op that was contagious, that could spread, that was rooted in the community, and could build the sort of decentralized bottom-up movement to create more housing co-ops. And it's designed to provide housing and build a large membership base in order to fulfill its function. We'll move to the next slide. And we made it have 4 different classes of stakeholders, similar to a community land trust in a lot of ways in terms of the stakeholder classes, but a little bit different. So that has community owners, just like a community land trust has community as part of its board of directors. It has resident owners, like a community land trust. And here the experts are the people that work in the organization. They are the staff of the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. The only addition is that there are investor owners who are also formal legal members of EBPREC, because it's not a nonprofit, so it can have investors. And the community has legal membership in the organization and has a vote on things that happen in the organization. If you'll move to the next slide, Ricardo. The relationship between these stakeholders and the board of directors of the organization is a little bit complicated, but it's designed to distinguish it a little bit more from a typical community land trust. There's 8 people on the board. 5 of these people are elected and 3 of them are appointed. So like in a community land trust, you have a staff person on the board or a staff representative, a resident representative on the board of directors, and a community representative. The blue, yellow, and green icons here represent those people. And those 3 are elected just by the class that they represent. So the residents elect the resident director, the staff elect the staff director, and the community elects the community director. The investors don't have any direct representative that they elect solely on their own, because the goal is not to give a voice to capital in this model, but to give a voice to the community that's being served or providing the services. And then all of these classes, including investors, elect the financial and governance representatives on the board of directors. So they have sort of all of their voices being heard by a few representatives and individual voices being heard by some of the others. And finally, community is centered even more in the 3 directors that are appointed. There's a people of color housing justice director that ensures the organization stays true to its mission of providing housing primarily for people of color in the Bay Area. There's an indigenous director that is appointed by indigenous organizations that ensures that they maintain a good relationship with the indigenous people in this area as they acquire land in this area, unoccupied land. And there's a Black East Bay director that ensures that the organization, beyond just a housing mission, contributes positively to the Black community in the East Bay. So the goal is to ensure that residents have a voice, staff have a voice, community has a voice, and then community has this even bigger voice in serving and shaping the direction of the organization. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Was there a question? No. I think the day-to-day operations of the Permanent Real Estate Cooperative are a little more important than the board of directors, but I started there. But I think the day-to-day and the attempt to be bottom up, like the social co-op definition, is what's important in the PREC model. The goal was to enable decentralized action by the community and by residents to achieve affordable housing, to achieve cooperative housing that can spread for themselves. And that is accomplished through the use of owner groups at EBPREC. So if you'll move to the next slide. Basically, EBPREC gives people in the community, its community members, its resident members, a way to exist in this state where they're not separate from the cooperative, but they're also not part of the cooperative. It's something in between where you can basically be a resident at a property in the East Bay, and you can come together with the residents in your building and you can say, we want EBPREC to help us buy this building, or we want to bring in EBPREC as our property manager or something like that. And there's a formal process that's spelled out where you can submit a form, and if you're approved by the ownership of EBPREC to be an owner group, then you get formal connection with a staff member. You get a dedicated staff member, you get dedicated staff time to help you with your project. You get sort of a communication channel to all the members of EBPREC to crowdsource ideas to get help. You get basically a free consultant to help you with financial modeling, to help you find a property if it's not your property, if you're looking for a property. You get help with decision making in your group and coming together and figuring out how you want to accomplish your goal. And EBPREC will even launch crowdfunding investment campaigns to raise millions of dollars potentially to acquire your property. So you get this decentralized community proposals, this sort of sense-making apparatus that people have in the community, and can bring that to EBPREC and utilize its resources to accomplish their goals. So that is the way that it's intended to be bottom up, which is something that happens in community land trusts where tenants will propose that their project be taken on, but there's no formal model for this. There's no sort of thing that binds the cooperative to do this, that binds a land trust to do this in a way that EBPREC is bound to move a project forward if the community agrees that it should be moved forward. Next slide. And then the sources of funding for this are interesting, I think, from the social co-op perspective. The definition of social co-op that was on the slide before my section talked about how most of the funding comes from local government. And while EBPREC is a co-op and EBPREC is not a nonprofit, most of its funding is from grants. And that is able to exist because we're both their legal counsel and their incubator and their fiscal sponsor. So we pass through money from grants to EBPREC. We do this in two different ways. We do it through a Model B fiscal sponsorship, which is where we enter into contracts with EBPREC to carry out certain work that serves our charitable purpose as an organization, and a Model C fiscal sponsorship where we just pass through funding to them generally because we think it's going to serve a charitable purpose, and we don't bind them to certain deliverables. They've also been able to get some direct program-related investments from foundations, which are basically when a foundation goes directly to EBPREC and gives them money that's an investment because they deem it to serve their charitable purpose. That is kind of the innovation in a way that allowed this to happen, which I'll talk about more on the next slide. But I think because social co-ops probably are not going to get I don't know. I won't speak what I don't know. I'll say that for EBPREC, it wouldn't be sustainable for them to just exist on rent from residents, or they couldn't do that. It wouldn't be possible to do that for them. Real estate is too expensive in the Bay Area. If you buy a building, the tenants aren't going to be able to afford to live there. They need subsidy to provide these services in a way that centers the community instead of harms the community. So they needed this kind of financial model to exist. They also have investor owner financing, which I think is more publicized about EBPREC if you're familiar with our work. They've raised a few $1 million from investor owners at a very small 1.5% rate of return that it provides them with patient capital to acquire properties as well. And then they get money from mortgages. They do take out mortgages to buy properties in combination with their grants to keep the properties affordable. And they've been able to access only minimal public subsidy, so minimal money from the government, mostly because the government will contract with for-profits, which I think is seen in the social co-op community around the world. But the government, for the most part, will not give a grant or a subsidy directly to a for-profit. And so EBPREC has had to access subsidies through partnerships with organizations like Community Land Trust to bring it full circle, because they're not really able to access those public subsidies, and because they're not big enough to win contracts with local government or state government or anything like that. Next slide. So the model of EBPREC really depends on them being able to access grants. And that was not something that was clear that really could be done when we did it. Janelle Orsi, an attorney at the Law Center, wrote this. There's a slide deck that I can share called Pushing the Boundaries of 501c3, which is the tax status that provides tax exempt status and allows you to receive charitable donations. Janelle argued that we could fiscally sponsor cooperatives, including multi-stakeholder cooperatives like this, because while it wasn't possible at one time, it wasn't justifiable under the law in the United States at one time that the IRS put forward. They had changed their definitions over the years that made it plausible that these types of social co-ops that are serving community, that are not profit oriented, that are preventing like economic deterioration or sort of doing economic workforce development, could be funded and could be fiscally sponsored. So that's what we did. And we continued to build out a program of fiscally sponsoring cooperatives. And now other people like Start.coop are doing this as well. So we were interested to see sort of how this is spreading. I think in the absence of 501c3 status, this is necessary to bootstrap social co-ops to fiscally sponsor them. There's also, Jerome Hughes has written an article that could be useful to you called, that talks about creating a specific category in 501c3 tax code for social impact co-ops, which I think are basically social co-ops, to move this from a risk-based decision for fiscal sponsors to a non-risky decision for funders and for fiscal sponsors, to have a clear agreement with the IRS that you can pass charitable funds to these organizations. Next slide. And then I think one of the things I've seen is that, social co-ops do not really have a patronage model like typical worker cooperatives where the profits go back to the workers. That's true for EBPREC as well. The staff owners, the experts at the organization receive salaries, but they receive no patronage. So any sort of profit generated by their labor goes into basically indivisible reserves, or it goes to fund resident owner finances or property acquisition or something like that. Resident owners do receive some financial benefit. They're sort of in the position of like consumers in a consumer co-op. They get 0 to 30% of property level profit back in a patronage refund account that basically they can access when they move out of the cooperative. The rest of the money generated by them goes to operating reserves or maintenance reserves for their property. And then funds are otherwise used to subsidize property acquisitions and keep them affordable, or to support owner groups in their organizing of new properties. I think I went a few minutes over time, Ricardo, but hopefully you got time. That's it for me.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate it.
Oh, awesome. If you have questions, hold them for just a little bit. That was amazing. Hold your questions. We'll come back toward the end and we can talk about any of these topics altogether. Yeah, go ahead, Ricardo.
Okay, sweet. So I'm going to be talking about prison cooperatives. Sorry, this is a really boring slide. Okay, why did we create them in our version? Why in California? Why now? So I'm going to do a little bit of storytelling to bring you up to speed, but basically there was a political window that allowed us to start this initiative and really see the opportunity. So from at least 2019 in California, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, including wardens from multiple prisons, had been going on study trips to Norway to learn about their prison facilities, training facilities, reentry programs, witnessing their famed humanistic practices, delivering wellness, safety, and empowerment to to the folks who were incarcerated there. And so that through those learning journeys to Norway and folks coming to California, there was this thing called the California model that was created to reform the California prison system. And so there were 4 pillars that this California model was built on. The first was normalization. So how does the California prison system create conditions inside of prison that mirror as much as possible like life outside of prison? So that was one pillar. The second was dynamic security. So it's an approach of trying to get create positive relationships between staff and incarcerated individuals. Peer mentorship. So how can this program seek to train incarcerated individuals to use their lived experiences to mentor and support other incarcerated folks or formerly incarcerated folks? And then the fourth is becoming a trauma-informed organization. So how does the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, or CDCR, commit to improving the practices, policies, and cultures of their entire department by educating staff at all levels to realize and recognize the impacts of trauma and ensure the physical and emotional safety of all staff and incarcerated individuals. So there was this California model without really any the wardens didn't know this was going to happen, but one day Gavin Newsom in March of 2023 held a press conference at San Quentin and said, we have this California model. Here's like 150, 180 page report on what this model is, what we're trying to do with it. And we're going to start in San Quentin. And so there was a lot of, it's interesting as we've gone in to do this work, just the politics inside of prisons and between prisons and against the governor for doing this. But Gavin Newsom chose San Quentin as the guinea pig to implement this California model. And so why San Quentin? Because basically it's already the flagship prison in the California prison industrial complex for innovative programming. They work with a lot of nonprofits that do programming inside of the prison. My sister, for example, is a therapist, and when she was going to school to become a therapist, a marriage and family therapist, she was doing Shakespeare in San Quentin. So going inside and getting and organizing the incarcerated folks to put on Shakespeare plays inside San Quentin. So San Quentin is where this California model is getting rolled out. And in San Quentin, there was an individual named Kelton O'Connor who was trying to do work around food justice and environmental justice and trying to bring in a more humane and healthy perspective and programming for incarcerated folks. He's incarcerated into the California, into San Quentin. And so he wrote, in a world where communities of color remain the most impoverished and the most affordable foods are also the most deadly, food has become the most fatal club swung by structural racism. And nowhere else is the harm of the food desert more pronounced than in jails and prisons. So he started looking into how can I create some programs inside San Quentin to get healthy food into the prison. And somebody said, oh, the things that you're trying to do sounds like they could be done as co-ops. And he's like, what's a co-op? So he started researching co-ops and heard about the law center and reached out and was like, hey, I want to talk to y'all about co-ops. I have some ideas. And one of his ideas was food is medicine. So how are we looking at food, healthy food, as medicinal, having medicinal impacts inside of San Quentin. So this is Kelton in the middle photo, kind of leaning in with his hands like this. So that's Kelton, and he was trying to develop this programming inside of San Quentin. And one of the things that he did was he contacted some folks on the outside and co-founded this organization called Earth Equity to do environmental justice programming inside of prisons and also with returning citizens. And so their mission is to reduce recidivism, eliminate unjust food practices in prisons, jails, and fence-line communities, and nurture system-impacted people. They do this by creating programs which educate incarcerated people, support returning citizens, and strengthen the communities and ecosystems to which they return. So Kelton contacted us, and with the volunteers at Earth Equity, we started having conversations about this. And I had heard about prison cooperatives before, or cooperatives owned by incarcerated folks inside of prisons. But then it behooved us to start to do some more research. So we started looking around the world at other examples. And so we started looking at Puerto Rico, Ethiopia, Italy, which we'll hear a little bit more about later. And if you came to David's talk at a previous session, you heard about Sweden and Canada, where prisoners not only earned more money than they would otherwise in prison, but they also built the skills that would help them keep them out of prison after release. And so we did some research, and I just want to shout out to a couple of folks. There's Jessica Gordon-Nebhart, who is the woman with the purple head thing. She wrote a book called Collective Courage, the African-American Thought and Practice, cooperative, something like that. Sorry, Collective Courage. It's a great book. But she is a researcher, and she researched with Esther West, who is in the photo next to her in the foreground, smiling without the hat on. And them two, they did research on prison cooperatives. And so they've put out some reports on prison cooperatives around the world, and what we can learn from them and some best practices. So, but as a law center, we were like, okay, how do we engage with this work? We're also working with folks who are abolitionists, prison abolitionists. A lot of us in the law center are prison abolitionists. And so there's, that difference between like, oh, I have this value of prison abolition, but then when we're trying to engage it in practice, what does that actually mean? And I think that's something that I found very generative when the work around cooperatives is that it basically forces us to confront these contradictions that exist in the systems that we're moving through. And so how do we look at abolition of an economic system reliant on carcerality? So not so much the abolition of prisons, but the abolition of a society that could have prisons, that could have slavery, that could have the wage, and therefore not abolition as the elimination of anything, but abolition as the founding of a new society. So that's some of the way that a way that we've been informed by some of the research. So this is Martin and Arnie, who wrote that, whose quote that's from. And then also looking at, okay, as we help and support the development of cooperatives inside of prisons, how is that connected to abolition? And is this a reformist reform, or is it a non-reformist reform? And so what do we mean by that? A reformist reform continues to expand the reach of carceral logic and carceral systems versus non-reformist reforms, which gesture at a fundamentally distinct system or set of relations toward a particular ideological and material project of world building, of that abolitionist world building. And so we try, as we were shaping this in our policy work, of what would worker cooperatives inside of prisons look like, and how would they be structured, to keep those things in mind, as to keep this non-reformist reforms in mind as we were developing the structure. So what is the state's ability to intervene and participate in the governance or management? And how is this actually disrupting the carceral labor system in California that is worth at least $380 million. And that number is based off of how much money is generated by CalPIA, the California Prison Industry Authority, which basically has a monopoly on prison labor in California and the activities of prison labor and the sale of goods and services out of prisons. There's also a thing called the joint venture program, which I'll talk about in a minute. So what are we trying to do? So we started working with Tina McKinner, who's here talking right now. She's an assembly member from Inglewood in Southern California, to introduce Bill AB 746, which is called the Inmate Cooperative Program Bill. And so what this would do is incentivize the development of worker cooperatives within California prisons and establish critical infrastructure to support an ecosystem of cooperatives owned and governed by incarcerated and formerly incarcerated individuals, as well as crime survivors. So what we were actually trying to do, and we were researching social cooperatives as we were trying to develop this, whether this was going to be multi-stakeholder, whether this was going to be, how would money generated by these cooperatives inside of prisons be directed towards a social purpose. And so what we ended up developing was that these would mostly look like typical worker cooperatives that exist outside of prisons, and that we were creating the security infrastructure of what is needed from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to allow for this to happen. So what's the process for these cooperatives to be approved inside of prisons? But then also, how is this being connected to a larger ecosystem? And so that in the bill, 40% of the wages generated by the workers would be put into a fund, and that fund would be stewarded by a CDFI or a credit union, and distributed to formerly incarcerated folks, crime survivors, and system impacted individuals. So system impacted individuals are folks who have had some impact on their lives by the justice system, and they would be eligible to apply for and receive this funding to start or expand cooperative enterprises outside of prison, so that are in a green industry or have some green aspect, environmental aspect to it. So that's the bill that we wrote. We went through 2 different policy committees, the Labor and Employment Committee and the Public Safety Committee, and we passed with no opposition in both of those committees. Those are the policy committees. And then last week, no, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago, it went to the Appropriations Committee, which is the Budget Committee. California is in a budget deficit, and basically they just started cutting all of the bills that were going to have any fiscal impact that were new, like initiatives. So our bill got held in committee, which basically meant it got killed. But it's not over yet. We are still in this because we can reintroduce the bill next year. That's allowed, and so we're still going to be working with this Assembly member McKinner to reintroduce the bill later this year for the next year's legislative cycle. So, who are we doing this with? The work that we're doing this with. One is Actera, which is an environmental justice organization. I already mentioned Earth Equity. We're also working with Repaired Nations, which does worker cooperative or cooperative development in Oakland, primarily with African American communities. And so they've already actually started a book club inside San Quentin, using Collective Courage as the book for their book club to start getting folks interested in this cooperative model and then becoming the initial members of any cooperative that we could hopefully support inside of San Quentin. We're also working with Arizmendi, who would bring the technical skills of the business on the business side, because the first business that we would hope to start is a cafe, which is being built under this California model and funded by Governor Newsom. And so we're hoping to become the vendor, or Arizmendi Association of Bakeries, thank you, is in the Bay Area in California. And so they would come in and support in training and development of the business model, as well as the products that would be offered. And then last is another organization that Kelton co-founded, which is the Let Us Contribute Initiative. And so this is another organization that is primarily focused on building cooperatives inside and outside of prisons. And yeah, so there's that. And we can, if you have questions about why this was created, we can talk about that later. So our work at the Sustainable Economies Law Center, with this work is that we're co-developing cooperative structures. So working with the folks on the inside to develop the model, drafting this legislation, doing the advocacy, and then doing research. I know I'm like way past time, so I'm just going to like skim through these, and I already shared the slides with y'all. But some of the research that we were doing was getting current or understanding the current context of the prison labor regime in California and the United States. So we looked at minimum wages, if any, because slavery is still allowed in prisons for incarcerated folks in the United States, and California voted down last year or earlier this year to continue to allow for that in California prisons. Yeah, so we saw that cooperatives could provide a pathway to disrupt this labor regime. And then maybe the last thing that I'll just say is that part of the legislation that we built was that each of these cooperatives inside of prison would need an external partner. So in what we call the co-op community partner. That co-op community partner would be there to facilitate or provide the training to the cooperative and the cooperative members, provide administrative support, and then provide a link to institutions outside like banks, insurance companies, et cetera. And this co-op community partner would not be a member, but they could participate in board meetings and those types of things. So I know that was a lot. That is the end of my section. And yeah, I'll pass it to Elias and
Awesome.
David to, yeah.
Thanks, Ricardo. Davide, go ahead.
You hear me?
Yes.
No, it's a lot of things. Thank you very much. I got, first of all, I'm sorry for my English, but I'm Italian, so my mother tongue is another one. But I want to start thinking about the model, because in Italy, in our model, cooperatives, our enterprise model, because we are an enterprise, doesn't mean profit, but it means coordinations. And I think that this is one of the most important things that we have to know about Italian social co-ops, but not only social co-ops, about co-ops in general. I really love the works on real estate cooperatives, because it is similar to community of cooperatives that are a new kind of cooperatives that are raised nowadays in Italy, because many small towns in Italy now are being abandoned. And so in response of this depopulation, we created community cooperatives. That is an hybrid system between social cooperatives and housing cooperatives. So we build together the two main aspects of these two different kind of cooperatives, trying to revitalize the areas of central or south or in the north of Italy, and create work opportunities, because in our model, social co-ops, yes, we have a social purpose, of course, but we are labor-oriented. Okay, so we create work and we create a job for members of the cooperative. So they are member of the cooperative, but we create jobs for make possible for them their reintegration in the society. That pass not only by the works, because works and job alone can't help everyone to restart their life after a life of addiction or after a big period inside the prison. So we create a model that make possible for them to being helped not only by finding a job or working with us, but also in finding a house, not only a house. Things that in Italy we have I think the 20% of Italian incarcerated people could legally serve their sentences outside of the prisons, okay, through alternative measures. But but they can't do this because, for example, they don't have an house, okay? And so it is impossible for them to spend their part of their sentence outside of the prison. So what do we do? Because it's important to start from numbers. We are a small country than you, and so we have a prison population a little bit lower. So we have 71,000 of people inside Italian prisons, and thinks that we have a recidivism rate of 70% in all of our prisons, but these rates using works integration, using the works of social co-ops inside of the prisons become 2%. Okay, so what does it mean? That works and our model, it is one of the answer to the problem of the recidivism. And things that in Italy, the people who works inside of the prisons are the 17% of all the people who are inside our prisons. And we have 900 people that works externally. So Article 21, we call them. So people who could go out from the prison and works company or in social cooperatives and re-enter inside of the prison just to sleep, okay? So looking at this number, we are nowadays we have a big problem, so that our prisons are not built to make possible for people who are inside the rehabilitation. So the works, so the meeting with parents, for example, the meeting with wife, or the meeting with husband, the meeting with the son. So they are built just to punish the people and not to make possible for them a really start of a new life. Okay, I really love what you say about the abolition, because abolition is the founding of something new, no? And in my opinion, in Italy, abolition nowadays, it means that we have to find new ways of making possible for people inside of the prison or outside, if they can go outside, to restart a new life. So what we create, we take the social co-ops model and the cooperative model, and we create community of prisons. Okay, I can call it in this way, with our prison community. We said, okay, small, 20 people, not more than 20 people. And we can say, okay, we in this community, in this place, we make possible for them to serve their sentence, okay, but in the way that we decide and that they decide, because they become member of cooperatives, not in the way that the prison decides. And this is a really big difference, believe me, okay, because living their pain and their sentence in a community, it is different than live their sentence inside of the prison. We don't have the police in our community, but how can we build it? Because in Italy, we don't have the same law that you have. So in Italy, prisons, thanks God, are property of the state. So private entrepreneurs can't rule a prison, okay? But we can rule, as social co-ops, a community. And this is what we are trying to do. We have a fiscal regulation that make possible for us not to pay taxes on the works that prisoners do. They are all paid using our social contratto collettivo. Erica, if you can help me to translate Contratto Collettivo Nazionale del Lavoro, but because
Erica,
Sorry, I was offline. There was a break in the thing. What were you saying?
Thank you. Help me to translate Contratto Collettivo Nazionale del Lavoro, just to say that we paid all our members of the cooperative inside of the prison using the same contract that we have outside of the prison. So they are member of the cooperative in the same way of me, in the same way that Davide. L'ho detto io, tranquillo.
Thanks.
And so this is very important, because then the state Italian state, because we have a central state, don't give us nothing, don't give us money to create this community, but we are finding the money in private companies. And what does it mean? That private companies enter in the process not as the mentor, not as the one who define the process, but as the one who helped us in defining the process, giving us money just to make possible for people inside of the prison to improve a job. And when they ended their sentence, they can go and work in the company that help us paying money, okay, in the construction of this community. This is something, in my opinion, in our opinion, revolutionary, okay, because we is the abolition, okay, the abolition of one idea, the idea that the third sector, as we call it, social co-ops, and the private sector can't stay together. We can stay together. We have to stay together, because as I said in the first part of my interview, is that we are cooperatives means coordinations, and coordination means that we have to stay together to face the same problem, because we live in the same world. Okay, in my case, in the same country, so we face the same problem. So I don't want to be too much blah blah blah. I prefer just to talk about this.
No, that was great. It was great. We're almost at time. We're going to have Davide come back because there's more to learn here, right? Yeah, Ricardo agrees. I have a quick question right away, Davide, because I'm not sure I understood it in what you were saying. Here's my question. Is it possible to start a cooperative inside the prison and operate the business in contact with outside customers? Yes. Without obstacles? Is that a possibility?
Depends. Okay. It is possible to sell the products and to make possible. I use a strategy. Okay. I said that every visitors of our laboratory inside of the prisons are our stakeholders, shareholders, and so they can answer. In the community, yes. In the inside of state prison, no. In the community, yes. Okay. Because if we create something, okay, we sell, I don't know, tomatoes, for example, just to make something practice. Okay, people must go to the community and buy the tomatoes that we create with the works of prisoners. Okay, but it is on the crane of the mountain, something that you can do, but you have to stay very, very, very careful about making it possible for extraneous to enter inside the prison. You can do if you work inside, as we do. Do you understand, Elias? I understand good?
Yes, yes. Anybody else want to throw in a question here for either Davide or Ricardo? Yeah, Santiago.
Audio. Question. Davide, have you seen any impact on recidivism among your participants?
Yes. We the 2%. So from 70% of Italian recidivism, people who started to work with the Pandora, that is the cooperative of which I am the president, and the resident became the 2%.
Wow.
It is fantastic. They are fun, but not only in Pandora, also in other. It much more difficult with people with addiction that are inside of the prison. Okay, so we can divide the two data. The first one is for normal people, we can call it like this, and the second one is the 12%. Okay, because addiction, is different. We have to have a different approach, and it is much more difficult, in my opinion, and from my experience, after that they go out after 10 years of prisons. The first things, if they didn't do a work inside of the prison, and in the 90% of the case they didn't do it, the first thing that they want to do is to go and take drugs or alcohol or anything else.
Because I'm thinking for the people who are working on the California project, the recidivism dimension is a very important sales point.
Yeah, yes, it is. We did talk about the reduction in recidivism that we found that the Jessica and Esther had found in their research at looking at other prison cooperatives internationally. Yeah, so that was one of our selling points. It got killed in appropriations because we got screwed by CDCR, basically. They sent an analysis to the appropriations committee that was misleading and false about how much this would cost the state of California. And because of that, then and this was after working with them for the last like 8 months to make sure that it would have the least amount of financial impact, because what they were talking about were how many additional guards would be needed to supervise these activities. And then the second was, with the money coming in generated by these cooperatives, that somebody is going to have to like take out the taxes and then take out the restitution payments and garnishments and things like that, and who's going to do that. And there's already an existing system that is operating in the California prison system to do that. But what they told the appropriations committee is that that system doesn't exist, and it would cost tens of millions of dollars to the state of California to implement that system. So yeah, those were the main reasons we heard that it was held in committee and not passed through appropriations. But it also brings me to a question for David. I was wondering, are there any restrictions on incarcerated folks operating businesses or generating income through the work that they're doing inside of prison that you all needed to change? No, okay. Because that's one of the things that our policy would create an exemption for.
We don't have any restrictions, and for example, nowadays we are opening a new laboratory that is woodwork. We started to work with wood, so with machine that are a little bit periculous, okay, and but we have no restriction. It all depends inside of the prison from the director. But from my experience nowadays in Italy, a lot of directors are going and they are trying to create new spaces. So from this point of view, we are okay.
Here, a question actually for both Ricardo and Davide is the correctional officers. Are they playing a role in the politics of this, positive or negative?
David, do you want to go first, then I can go? Or
I don't understand the
correction
question.
Officers, guards. I mean, ultimately, this would lead to perhaps the employment of fewer guards, and they might be vigilant to keep their numbers up.
If
Ricardo,
I understand,
maybe if you take it on, maybe Davide will pick up on the concept.
So the way that our policy is written is that the guards wouldn't have any participation in the cooperative. They're just there to maintain the security aspect. Yeah, so that's the short answer. But the people who I think were against this, we also heard that there was some opposition from CDCR, but I don't think it was from like the union of correctional officers. I think it was from the administration. So
it all depends, but correctional officers, so initially they are policemen, okay? Just to make it clear, the 70% don't want our work, okay? Because I don't know why. Okay, because they are from in the other side of the streets. Okay, just because they have more fortune in their life. This is my opinion. Okay, about their work. But in the prison community, we don't have police officers because, for experience, we understand that they are sometimes because they do hard job. Okay, it is not a simple job there, but if we speak about rehabilitations, we have to create all the environment must be all oriented to the rehabilitations, and their presence sometimes, for example, sometimes they can't make possible for our stakeholders furniture to enter inside our laboratories because they don't want. Okay, and so I have to call the director and say, hey, they don't want to make, and so the director will call them and they, okay, director, but it depends on the people.
Elias, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Last question from Abe, and then we'll close it out.
My question is for the California groups. Just thinking about the legal challenges that you've had in making it happen there. And I'm in Newark, New Jersey, part of a housing justice group and local abolitionist work. And just wondered if people want to be doing this work in their own state, are there mentorship opportunities? Are there ways to learn from what you're doing to replicate it elsewhere?
Jay, you want to start on that question? And then I can follow up.
Is your question about the EBPREC or about the prison co-op work? I thought it was about the prison co-op work.
About both the EBPREC and the prison cooperatives.
I think you'd be better at it, Ricardo. Yeah, what would you say?
Mentorship opportunities, there's a lot of resources that we've created like online so if you go to our website, we have some resources there. We also helped the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative create some resources, so there's lots of documentation on their website as well that's specific to their particular version of the PREC model. And then it is being replicated by the Permanent Real Estate Cooperative model, is being replicated in a few other states. So I think one is in Massachusetts. Jay might know where a couple others are, but what was it? So there's no like formal mentorship opportunities. It's really been like a group is like getting started, wants to replicate the model, and then reaches out to us, comes to our legal cafe, or reaches out, and a lot of times reaches out to EBPREC and sees if they can have a meeting with them. So EBPREC is like really overwhelmed with work, so they might not get back to you, just as a expectation, set that expectation. And then with the prison co-op work, we try to do these types of things, like meeting with groups. We're going to be presenting with the Policy and Advocacy Council of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives and having a conversation there, I think, in this month at their next meeting. So if you're a member, even if you're not a member, I think you can go to the website, the Federation website, and sign up for that. And then, you can always set up a meeting with me if you just want to chat, or come to our legal cafes to chat. So those are some of the opportunities, but like similarly to the PREC model, we don't have any like formal mentorship training kind of things. So, but I'll also put my link to schedule a meeting with me in the chat in 1 second. So thanks for the question.
Okay, we better close out. Davide, Jay, Ricardo, thank you for all that inspiring work. And there's so much more we're going to have to do, right? So the community practice will continue. and come back to all these things, I'm sure. But thank you, everybody, for hanging with us today. And I hope you got something from this, and we'll be back in 1 month and do some more. All right. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thanks so much.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ciao.
Ciao. Grazie, David.
Thank you.